And now, like, I guess the theme to my life is ABC, always be curious. And I never thought of myself as a writer. I was in advertising sale, and it was like for magazines, and it was always the writers are on this side and sales is on this side. And I thought that what they did was magic. And then as my life changed, I started writing more and more, and I wrote blogs about my adventures. And then it just sort of went from there.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Nice to have you back today. We got another author in the making with a new book coming out in the future at the time of recording. Stacey is here today. We're going to be talking about two things that I never thought would go together. And but I'm curious and excited to have Stacey on the podcast. And I'm not going to tell you what those two things are yet until we introduce our guest. Hi, Stacey. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
Nice to have you here.
Great to see you, Dave.
Awesome. So there's two things that don't normally go together in our stories of history, and you're pulling these two things together. I'm excited about this. Before we jump there, tell everybody where you are in this big world of ours.
Right now, I am living in Oregon, the college town Corvallis. I moved here about almost 4 years ago from New York.
Oh.
So I'm a born and raised East Coaster, moved to the West Coast.
Wow. Okay. Anything you missed from the East Coast that you can't find in the East, in the West?
Oh, there's lots of things, but
Yeah.
I still have family and lots of friends back home. So I go back to visit and get my dose, and then I come back here and, enjoy both sides of the world.
There you go. Nice. You got both ends covered. I love that. You're an author in the works with something new coming, and you're writing about something unique that I've never even thought of before, and that's really cool. You're writing about two things, pirates and chocolate. And when I mentioned this to my wife, Stacey, she's like, what? Pirates and chocolate? I'm like, well, I talked to Stacey and she knows a lot. And I'm really curious about our conversation today. I know my wife is super curious as well. But okay, where did this all start for you, Stacey, to put these two things together? I always think pirates of big ships, gold, diamonds, rubies, and all the expensive stuff. I've never thought of chocolate and pirates together in the same sentence. So let's go there. Where did this all start for you as an idea?
Well, I guess the beginning seeds of it all were, now I can't even remember, over a decade ago, I went to a tarot card reader. And she kept looking at me very funny during the whole reading. And English wasn't her first language. She just kept looking at me. She goes, there's something that wants me to know to tell you, And it turned out that my spirit animal is the cacao bean. And I was like, chocolate, why not? I'll just go with it, whether or not you believe in spirit animals or spirit food. So I love just following my curiosity. So I just started learning more about chocolate. And during a trip to Costa Rica, we managed to go and take a tour of a chocolate farm, a finca, or a walk as they call them. And the owner there, it was a place called Caribbean or something like that. Anyway, as they were explaining the whole process, he also was introducing his interns who were indigenous to Costa Rica. The owner's a white man. And so he was teaching them how to make chocolate from the cacao beans they were growing. And he explained it as his way of making reparations for all the Costa Rica gold that the pirates stole. So that was the first time I heard about pirates and chocolate. And so the pirates kind of just stuck with me. And I also go to Burning Man, and the group I hang out with, we like to call ourselves pirates, and just dress up, and it's just a lot of fun. So I just started the two things to started to blend together. And I wanted to find more about the story that the man in Costa Rica had told me. So I started, searching on the internet, and there's really almost nothing on the internet. It's very, very hard to find when you type in pirates and chocolate, The first story that actually popped up was a story about a French buccaneer called Lolonet. It took me a while to figure out how to say his name because it looks much different. But he was going off to attack cities that are on the Lake Venezuela, which is actually called Lake Maracaibo back then. But he and his crews, because there were several ships together, he peeled off to go attack a Spanish galleon. And it turned out part of that treasure that they were carrying were cacao beans. So, and it was like 60 ton of cacao beans. It was a lot of chocolate.
Wow.
And so as you go through researching the history of chocolate, like one of the books I as I research chocolate is this book. It's like one of the most sourced books on chocolate as a resource, The True History of Chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
And you look in the index and it doesn't mention pirates or privateers at all. But as you read it, there are references to it. Mm. So, and then the same thing with most of the pirate books don't talk about it. Like, when I wanted to learn what pirates to talk about, this is Under the Black Flag and Black Flag's Blue Waters.
Yeah.
They don't really mention it. So it takes a lot of digging. So what basically I realized after I was doing all this was, there is no one history book that talks about pirates and chocolate, but there are a lot of stories out there.
Yeah.
Because for one thing, cacao beans back in the Mesoamerican times was used as money. Like one bean could buy you a tomato. 100 beans could buy you someone to spend the night with, or a nice linen shirt, so they used it as money. And actually it was actually used as money in like South America, Central America. I read recently that it was up until the early 1800s that they still used it. Now they don't know. Regular money's replaced it. And so with Columbus and Cortez, conquering New Spain, they learned about the magic of chocolate. They learned that it was A, used as money, and B, a great like caffeinated drink, because in those times coffee was still really rare and from Africa. Yeah. It hadn't moved to the Caribbean until the 1700s. So and the Europeans added sugar to it, and it became like Spain made it basically a national addiction, and they kept it a secret in a sense. So it was a great treasure to them. And so it's like there's like I could start telling you all the stories. Yeah, I have, I think, about a dozen different pirates and privateers that will be in my upcoming book. Like I have the whole index, and part of it is also researching it, because there was one story about a Boston ship captain who was fairly well-to-do in Boston, and the Old North Church had even started a museum, a chocolate museum named after him, until they had somebody do research on him and found out he wasn't just importing chocolate, he was also smuggling enslaved people. So it turns out that's one of the things. He wasn't a pirate, even though he was, a captain of a ship. He was a smuggler, and that's a different, there's differences. Yeah. Pirates come and take what they want. Smugglers use money, spend money, whatever, illegally. So I have to remove him from my chapter after I've done the research on him. But it was very enlightening about the whole process and how important it was to people.
So are you really into like history? Is that one of your main things that you love to know? Really? Okay, talk about this.
No, I just like to follow my curiosity. I mean, years ago, I started a thing called Adventure Wednesdays. Yeah. Because I need, I'm basically a recovering people pleaser. So I needed to, after my ex-husband and I split up, I needed to find out what I found fun. So that's why so I took myself out on small adventures on Wednesdays, and that's where it just built from there. Yeah. Just And now, like, I guess the theme to my life is ABC, always be curious. And I never thought of myself as a writer. I was in advertising sale, and it was like for magazines, and it was always the writers are on this side and sales is on this side. And I thought that what they did was magic. And then as my life changed, I started writing more and more, and I wrote blogs about my adventures. And then it just sort of went from there. And I also, my grandmother, when she turned 90, finally sort of opened up about her family history. And it turns out, I have ancestors who helped colonize America back in the 1600s. And one ancestor in particular really interests me. Her name was Hannah Spencer. And it could be through her family that I'm related to Lady Diana Spencer. So I haven't found all the links yet, but that's what they say.
Wow.
I know. I was like, what? Yeah, I thought I was an Irish mutt, Irish American mutt, but it turns out I have pedigree. But Hannah Spencer, who was born in Massachusetts in 1640, when she was 19 years old, turned down a marriage proposal, and the guy sued her and her father, like, to get the dowry back, and because he was embarrassed and all this. And then she didn't get married till she was 23. And so, the scandal was written up in the local news and whatnot. So I just I had a vision that I needed to give her a life between 19 and 23, and write her story and make it about, vision is like, it's going to be a bestseller book and blockbuster movie. So if you think about it, it's like Pirates of the Caribbean 20, the chocolate edition. And instead of a Johnny Depp, we have Hannah. And, she's this strong character. And so she has to leave the cold Connecticut town, and she's going to be like a nanny to a family that's going to help settle Jamaica. And since back then they didn't have doctors, and it was natural for women to learn herbal remedies. And so Hannah's going to be natural at herbal remedies. And so the pirates are going to go, you're coming with us. We need a doctor, and so she'll have some pirate adventures, probably amass some gold and learn about because they thought chocolate was healthy, so she'll use cacao as health food to help people feel better or whatever, so the story of chocolate's history will get interwoven into the pirate story.
Nice.
And, and then she'll amass this thing and go back and marry the love of her life, this guy, Daniel, and they'll set up a little merchant shop and live happily ever after. I haven't gotten the whole part, but the thing is, because I don't know history, and I'm not from 1640 or 1650 or 1660, I started to dive into it. And that's, and so, my mind is like, all right, what pirates were active in 1660, which is about the time she would have been traveling the Caribbean. And that's where I learned that it would have been Captain Morgan, and it would have been this guy, William Hughes, and it would have been this, like all these other people. And, and I'm like, okay. So, and then I was trying to find their connections to chocolate. And that's where I started realizing there's a gap in the history books. I couldn't just go to one source and say, oh, good, here's what I need, So I was like, all right, I'll create that book. So it's been really fascinating to read history books and see how they go to the original sources, and how some of the original sources in the pirate world are really kind of shady. We talked in today's news about the truth in news, and everybody's doing things to make it exciting. It's been going on forever.
Right.
They did it back in the 1600s and the 1700s. And, but they would write books, and it's like, that's not, they were, this guy Exquemelin, I haven't learned how to say his name yet, but he tends to write, his book on the general history of pirates tends to be the source that a lot of people go to. But it turns out his stories might have been just based on stories sailors told in the pub,
Right.
And you can imagine what those would be
those
like.
Those are all fact-based for sure. 100% facts. Yes. Interesting. Okay. So Anything that's really standing out to you that you didn't realize while in the process of writing this and working on this book that you're like that connection obviously between pirates and chocolate is amazing, but is there any other thing that stood out to you? You're like, wow, this is something like a different tangent or a different road I didn't think I'd be going down when I do my research?
Um, I think every fact I come across is fascinating, and uh, the biggest surprise to me was how popular drinking chocolate was back then.
Yeah,
Like everybody knows about the Boston Tea Party,
right.
but they don't discuss that. Well, to be patriotic, the colonists drank chocolate and sometimes coffee, but both were really pricey. But they drank it instead of tea to be patriotic. And I didn't know that, and I didn't know that they had chocolate houses, like coffee, like we have our coffee, coffee cafes.
Yeah,
They had those for chocolate, and even in England, it was like one of the hot spots for men to gather and talk politics. Was they could drink most of the things it was offered was chocolate.
yeah.
So it was just interesting how much of it played a part in history and often is just not talked about. And partly because everybody's perception today of chocolate is sort of Hershey bar.
Yeah.
And that's so far from what it was back then.
Right.
Because it wasn't until the industrial age in the 1800s that the process to make a chocolate bar occurred. So so they had to kind of do it the old-fashioned way. They got the beans, they had to crush the cacao nibs to make it a paste, and then they add the hot water or hot milk, and then spices. So like Mesoamericans, the ancient Mesoamericans would add vanilla, cinnamon, I think nutmeg, and another spice I don't know called achiote, which made it red. So often the stories that you hear about, like, how cannibalistic a lot of the ancient, indigenous folks who were down there, by the drawings, it looks like blood, but it oftentimes was probably just red colored chocolate.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's been a lot of rabbit holes, but there are a lot of fun rabbit holes because chocolate, because pirates.
It's amazing.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just a lot of fun facts like that. So, like the story of Blackbeard, his last treasure was basically cacao beans and sugar, and then and some slaves. You
Yeah.
know, how casual. And also, he used the chocolate and sugar to bribe the local officials. So, why was it that he chose that as his last treasure? It was he going to retire and just drink cacao on the beach?
Mm.
Could be.
Wow.
And Captain Morgan, who I thought would be easy to find a connection because he owned a sugarcane plantation, and sugarcane and cacao beans grow well together in that
Yeah.
climate. But I haven't found a direct link yet. It's like, I've got Captain Morgan here and I've got all these radiating
Yeah.
facts around him, but nothing directly connecting. So I'll get there.
It's amazing. So, okay, do you enjoy doing research then?
I do.
Okay,
I
so
do.
that's good because I can imagine there's a lot of content that you have to go through and sift out the stuff that's been said at a bar by a drunken sailor, pirate compared to a fact, and you're going to have to weed through all this information and kind of build a
Yep.
world around this. So your book is going to
Yeah.
be more than just a history textbook; it's going to be a story as well, right? You're going to kind of blend them
It'll
together.
it, it'll be well, I just feel like each chapter will be a different pirate.
Okay.
Um, their connection to chocolate.
Yeah.
So some will be longer, some will be shorter, because there were a couple of pirates in the around 1700 that were actually journaling and kept records of them actually drinking chocolate. Um, until that's back when pirates were still, privateers were still a good thing for countries with almost no navies. So it's almost like the way as I go down the further, research, it's almost like each pirate I'll probably select for their place to tell a certain part of chocolate history, in a sense, like how from the early 1600s, how it was valued and how it changed to the early 1700s.
Amazing.
So kind of covering the golden age of piracy, but a little bit on each side, because that's technically, I think, depending on who you talk to, it's like 1615 to 1730, but chocolate and actually in piracy expand both ways. Wow. So yeah, it's fun and it's international. Like one of the biggest stories is a Dutch privateer, Pietersen Hein, who is known for having the largest silver capture ever. Like he got a fleet of like 7 Spanish the Spanish treasure silver fleet, and he brought home over 11 million guilders, which in today's dollars probably would have been $250 million or more.
Oh, cacao.
And there was a lot of cacao in there. And so with him, I've been going and finding manifests of the ships. And what's been interesting about that is I found one in Old Dutch, and it's like a etching like a poster that they made to show the public his great treasure, because he came home a huge hero to Amsterdam, because they were trying, the Dutch were trying to break away from Spain, and that much money taken almost bankrupt Spain and help fund the Navy, or the building of ships and whatever for a long time for the Dutch. So he was this big hero.
Wow.
And so anyway, so I found like a copy of a poster, but it's in like this Gothic type and it's really hard to read. And I finally got like a better translation, but trying to figure out what the word is. Like it could be crate, it could be cask, it could be trunk, it could be suitcase. It's like trying to figure out what the actual quantity of, when they say they have 16, no, I can't remember the word, but of this thing, it's like, well, what does that represent?
Yeah, how big, how much? Yeah.
And then, so in trying to figure that out, I found a Spanish version written by the general of the Spanish Armada, saying to his people, here's what we were carrying that was taken. So it's interesting to see the two different sides of how, what he says was taken and what they say they got. So It's just interesting.
Yeah.
And it's part of the treasure. And of all the things that were listed, there, like the Spanish manifest listed 12 things. And, so silver was the largest, and then gold, and then wood, and then spices and silks and things like that. But chocolate was 6, like of the 12 things. So it was right in the middle for value and all that stuff. And I think I figured out it was over $1 million worth of chocolate. Now I can't remember the. You'll have to read my book to find out how much chocolate it was.
I'll have to read the book. I love it. It's perfect. I love how you did that. Do you have a timeline for the book? Do you have a date in mind when the book is going to be ready?
Have it ready. Well, I would love to have it ready by next year.
Okay.
What I learned, like I took one of those women in publishing courses, that a lot of women writers go to. And what I learned there is for nonfiction books, I can approach like a university press with my introductory chapter, maybe the first chapter and the table of contents, and approach them to see if they'll publish the book without having to have the whole thing completely written.
Yeah.
And that would be a big, to me, a big help. Because yes, in my vision, I don't want to self-publish. I want to have I want it to be on every library shelf that it can be, because
Nice.
I want to fill that history gap, and I want to find it on, my local college shelves when I want to go find information, or the person who comes after me. So that's one of the reasons I want to have it and there are a lot of the history books that I'm reading are published by university presses. So, so if any of your listeners out there are connected to a good university press, hello.
Hello, we need some help over here. Yeah, okay. And so you're doing this all by yourself. You're doing great resources and searching. Is there anybody helping you, or are you looking for any help at all in your process of writing?
I hadn't actually asking for help. I mean, maybe it's like one of those things that once I approached a university press, they'd be able to help me get that kind of help.
Yeah.
I am on a pretty tight budget. It's not like, I do as I say, I have to work to afford my writing addiction. So so yeah, I've been doing it all by myself. And I am fortunate that I am in a university town, because a lot of the information I find is behind those walls. So I can go to the university on my community pass and get access to a lot of articles that you can't just get on the internet.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I was reading one of the history books that I was reading said, "Oh, and thanks to a team of researchers." I'm like, "Oh, that would be so nice."
Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah.
It seems like a luxury. It'd be really nice.
What I find interesting is you have two big topics you're searching: piracy and chocolate, and you have experts on both, and they might not even talk to each other. And so you're kind of like pulling the best out of chocolate research and all of that background and all of the piracy as well. That's a big task to take on, but I can tell you're really enjoying this.
I am. I did find there's one Swedish man who does videos on pirates, and I like listening to his stories. And he did one on chocolate, but that's where I realized that the perception out there with some, how when you get into a topic, you're all the way here, and you forget that everybody else is here.
Mm-hmm.
Like everybody's here at Hershey Bar, and I'm like, no, it was money all the way, over here. And so this one Swedish guy, when he was writing about pirates and chocolate, he wrote a video about pirates and chocolate, but I could tell that he didn't know enough about chocolate because he still had the perception that it candy bars.
Yeah. And
it's not, it, they may have sweetened it, but it was sugar for them was so expensive that, and also, so it's like, I could see the gaps in his knowledge is basically what it was. Even though he's an expert in pirates, he didn't know enough about chocolate to cover the topic properly.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So that's kind of, I love how you found a gap. You found a spot where there's a lack of information and you're going to attack it. That's very, very smart. I love that. You're going to fill in some blanks for people who might not, again, like me, never put the two together. So I find it quite fascinating, really. I love history. I love reading about history. So I'm going to be one of your target audience members for reading this book. So I'm excited.
Yeah, it is a lot of fun. And one of the things too, like I just went to, when I was in Eureka, I went to Eureka for an event, and they have a new chocolate factory there. It's called Dick Taylor Chocolates. And a lot of the Dick Taylor, and I bought their drinking chocolate because that's how pirates do it.
Right.
But a lot of their cover art are like etchings of sailboats. And having admired their art for a while, it occurred to me that I would love to create a line of chocolate bars that are modeled after the pirates' personalities. So like Captain Morgan would have, the rum flavoring and probably a little sea salt, some spice because who he was spicy.
Yeah.
And made with Jamaican cacao beans. So, and then Blackbeard, well, it would have to be a dark chocolate. and probably smoky. Have a
Yeah.
smoky flavor to it because him with his
Yeah.
beard that he would do things to make it look like he was on fire or whatever.
Right. So you've already got
so that kind
merchandise. You found out you got swag. You got all kinds of great stuff. This is amazing. Wow.
It's fun. It's
So,
fun.
yeah. So if you're a chocolate company out there going, hey, I would love to put my hand up and maybe help with this in some degree, we'll make sure we have all the links and everything so you can talk to Stacey yourself. But it's exciting to see this all happen. I wish it was like next week that the book was available, but I realize it's going to take a while to pull all this together. Are you overwhelmed at any point in the process of writing this where you're like, wow, this is a lot of work, or are you just loving it?
I'm just loving it. I keep saying, all right, I'm going to write one chapter about one pirate, and then I run into a wall.
Yeah.
And so I have to put it aside and I go to another one. So and then you dig deep into that. So like I was saying, like Captain Morgan, I have a lot of information all around him, but not the one that points to him.
Yeah.
So I put him aside for a while, and then I went to another privateer, William Hughes, who was actually a botanist, and he wrote an early book all about the American nectar chocolate, but I can't find the original source of how he was definitely a privateer. So, there's one source, but not verifiable. So there's a wall that I've kind of hit. And so I have to find other ways to write about him. It's like, okay, I'll write about how botanists did go on ships on a lot of times as assistant doctors. And as I was saying about Hannah, her being, herbal remedies, well, it was an actual thing that happened back then, is that people would, botanists and naturalists were brought on to ships as assistant to the doctor.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of fascinating stuff where the research for my history book is really helping also my movie book.
Wow.
So yeah, it's like one thing is leading into another. So that's why it's like, all right, I'll start with this, Piet Hein, the Dutch national hero. And there's a lot of information on him. But as I was telling you, I went down the rabbit holes of trying to find the manifests. And then it's also trying to put it all into an interesting story.
Right.
So he might be like, whereas I thought William Hughes was a slam dunk as my first chapter, he's not. Captain Morgan is not. I did write about Blackbeard in my blog and his connection to chocolate, but the more I learn about pirates and learn about Blackbeard, there's more to him that I need to go, more rabbit holes about him I need to go down. Because somebody discovered he actually did have family in Jamaica, because people are like, oh, nobody knows his origins. But one pirate expert went and did through one of the genealogy websites and found family connected. So, which it gives more reason as to why he would have been drinking chocolate, because it was sort of an high society aristocracy that was drinking it. So he would have been brought up drinking chocolate. So why not, years later, retire drinking chocolate?
So, okay. So I'm going to ask, because when this book comes out, I would love to have you back and celebrate the book and show it off and be all excited about it. And your full line of chocolate bars and all the other stuff that's going to come along with it. I'm excited. Maybe a pirate hat or something. So yeah, when that day comes, would you please come back and share more about the book? We can promote that.
I would love to, because after this book, I still have that second book. I got to get the other blockbuster movie out. Book and movie.
Great. So for people who want to follow along on the journey as you're writing, we talked about maybe Instagram would be a good place to go to start. Does that be a good place where we should go?
That would be probably the best. I created an Instagram called Chocolate Adventure Mentor. And because I also do chocolate pairings. So if you do, chocolate and rum pairings, obviously I get to talk about pirates.
Nice.
But it's where I post a lot of the interesting side fun facts that I learned either about chocolate or about pirates or both. And I do have a link to my website. My current website is Adventure Wednesdays, and I have a whole section on chocolate. So even if I do start a future website for Chocolate Adventure Mentor, it will be connected to my Adventure Wednesdays website.
Awesome. Good to have links to all of that in the show notes. What is your favorite chocolate before we go? Is there something that you like? What's your chocolate preference drink? Chocolate bar, candy bar? What do you like? What do you like?
I am definitely a big believer in craft chocolate. I try to get people off of Hershey and the mass bars because, for one thing, they don't have enough cacao to actually really be called a chocolate bar. And they also use the way that these major brands, Nestle, Mars, Hershey's, source their cacao. It creates a slave industry in West Africa.
Wow.
And so I tend to go with the higher end craft bars that are fair trade and beyond. So the chocolate company I just told you in Eureka, they do direct trade, which is even beyond fair trade, where they're dealing directly with the farmers.
Nice.
In each country where they're getting their beans. So it's called single origin chocolate bars. And that's where you really get to see the differences in how the cacao bean tastes from countries and that ferment and all the things.
Right.
So I don't really have a favorite. I like to vary it, but the best chocolate experience I ever had was doing a tasting with mezcal and chocolate. Because the way I like doing chocolate pairings, it's for people to do that 1 + 1 = 3, like putting two unexpected things together and going, wow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened with me with a certain really dark, salty chocolate and a really good smoky mezcal. And my mouth just was like, whoa.
Nice.
And so it's like, that's the whole thing too with the books. If they think about it, chocolate and pirates, you're like, put them together and you're like, wow.
Yeah.
Anyway, so no, I don't have a favorite chocolate, but I have a favorite kind of chocolate.
Yeah. And I love the idea of supporting chocolate from the source and supporting the people that grow it and create this great stuff for us. It's a great point. I really would encourage people to do that. I know for coffee, I like doing that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But let's do the same for chocolate. That's a great point.
Definitely.
Excellent. So everyone, go check the show notes for Stacey. All the information will be there. Go follow her on her Instagram as well. And will there be updates as you're writing the book on Instagram to let people know?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. And I will, as whenever, yes, as every step of the way, I like to share.
Good. And we'll have you back then when the book's ready and we can get our chocolate on. It'd be great. Great to have you back again.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Everyone, go check out all the information in the show notes for the podcast and let Stacey know that you heard her on the show and maybe respond back with your favorite chocolate and let's share some ideas. And if you know anything about piracy and chocolate and you want to help Stacey in her quest of creating this book and you will have some information that might help, definitely reach out and let Stacey know. I know she'd love to hear from you. So Stacey, thank you so much for being part of the podcast.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks for being part of the podcast again. Appreciate you investing time in the show and you for listening this far. Thank you. One thing to keep in mind is we are looking for help and some support for the podcast. If you are able to help support our show, our little podcast show here, we can go over to livingthenextchapter.com and all the instructions will be there to help support the show. It takes about $30 to $40 a month to do this, just for the hosting and all of that other stuff that we pay for. But if the show is giving you any value and you're enjoying what's happening here, would love any kind of support that you can offer. That would be great. And you being here and sharing the show helps us grow. Helps us get great new authors on the show connect with other listeners, and build community. So whatever you can do to share this show today, I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here for Living the Next Chapter, and I can't wait to share the next one with you. Talk soon. Have a great day.